The sound that woke me this time was clear, loud, and right outside the door. It was the sound of a man clearing his throat, the sound someone makes when they want your attention. My eyes shot up, and I moved to the glass, and there, just peeking over the lip of the door, I can see someone looking into my cab. I freeze, hoping they can't see me, but it doesn't matter. This guy's eyes are rolling back and forth, taking it all in, looking for whoever is inside. He looks crazy, like he'd given himself a haircut with a butter knife. Some of it was shaved, some of it was long, and I could see nicks along his scalp. I think his eyebrows were shaved off too, but it was hard to tell in the moonlight. I could literally feel this guy pulling on the door handle, making the entire truck move. I did the only thing that I could think of, shout as loud as I could. "What do you want?" I hollered at the glass, still motionless in the back of the cab. This is also a censored conversation, as I remember swearing in literally every sentence that I spoke to this guy. He said, "It's me." "Who?" I asked. Okay, maybe this was a case of a mix-up. I sat up and reached for the club on the floor. "It's Henry, come on," he pleaded. "I don't know you. I'm not from here. Now please just get away from my truck," I explained to him. The conversation devolved from that point forward. Playing hard to get? I like it. "Let's do something different," he said. This guy went on at length about what he wanted to do to me. None of it involved violence at all. Everything this guy said was sexual from start to finish. I'm watching this guy lick the window of my semi as he tells me he wants to kiss my feet, worship me, pleasure every part of me. I'm not homophobic, but the whole thing was nauseating. As he's going on and on and on about his sexual fantasies, transitioning into what he wants me to do to him, I'm yelling for him to just please go away. Throughout the entire thing, his tone changes. He starts talking about his desires, which were much more violent. This guy wanted someone to hurt him during their sexual escapades, punched, choked, tied up, and abused, the whole shebang. I couldn't really believe what I was hearing. He switched from licking the window to tapping on it before finally smashing his fist into the glass. I had to do something. I remembered my portable DVD player and, for whatever reason, came up with this weird little plan. I opened it up and faced it away from the front of the cab so the light would illuminate my face, but he wouldn't be able to see what the light was coming from. "I'm calling the police," I said, hoping the light source would look like a car phone or a radio. "I've got your South Dakota plates too." "Nathan?" he asked. "I'm not who you're looking for." "Now get the hell out of here, man," was the last thing that I ever said to this person. I watched him leap down and start running all in one swift motion. The van fired up and, without even turning its headlights on, fled from the parking lot like a bat out of hell. Honestly, I ended up doing the same. After another inspection of the trailer and tires to make sure everything was secure, I rolled out and made for Livingston. That morning, I really played with the idea of calling the police and making some kind of report, but thought it would be more trouble than it was actually worth. I didn't have the actual plate number, just that it was a Dakota van, so I figured my report would go absolutely nowhere. It wasn't until I got out of trucking that I realized how common this type of encounter was, especially after the invention of Craigslist. Truck stops have always been known for midnight rendezvous, but became explicit for random hookups all over the country, particularly for traveling men who wanted to experiment. Whoever that Henry guy was, he thought I was Richard, who was probably another trucker rolling through Montana that night. Henry must have gotten the truck station mixed up, or Richard was late to the arrival, so he got us confused. Regardless and whatever the case, I'm very glad that I had my doors locked that night, as I could be telling a very different story right now. Have a plan when you hit the road and always stick to that plan. This happened when my now husband and I were moving from the east to the west coast of the US. This had been our second time making this trip, and this one was just to pick up a few last things and grab our 2 dogs. At this point, we were just trying to make good time since we were tired of being on the road and would only stop for food and restroom breaks. So we weren't strangers to rest stops at odd hours of the day. I can't remember what state this happened in because we do a lot of traveling, and rest stops have all blurred together over the years. Anyways, my husband had been driving for a while, and it was time to switch off, walk the dogs, and stretch our legs. So we pulled into a rest stop around 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. There was only one other vehicle in the lot, most likely with someone sleeping inside of it, and not that many truckers in the truck area, so the rest area was fairly empty. I jumped out of the car and let my husband know I was going to run into the restroom before I let the dogs out. While I ran in, he was going to hang out by the car to have a smoke and keep an eye on our dogs. However, we parked our car by the dog area, and to get to the restrooms, you had to walk over this hill. You couldn't see the restrooms from our car. Being late at night, my husband decided to walk most of the way with me to make sure I got there okay. I wasn't worried but didn't mind the extra comfort of having him there. I finished up in the restroom and came out to walk the dogs and let my husband take his restroom break. Even though it was late and I felt a bit cut off from the lighted area of the rest stop, I wasn't worried. I'm small and don't weigh much, but my dogs are German Shepherd mixes and very protective of me. Plus, I was taught self-defense at a young age and feel capable of defending myself if the time came. So I'm walking my dogs and letting them do their business when I noticed that one of the semi-trucks, which had been sitting on the far side of the stop, starts up and slowly drives in my direction. This didn't seem worrisome to me because they were on the trucker's side, and I assumed they were heading to the exit to get back onto the highway. I grabbed 2 doggy bags to clean up after my dogs and started heading to the trash can. As I'm walking, I'm suddenly blinded by bright headlights. I looked in the direction of the lights and saw that the semi, which I thought was leaving, had pulled up as close to the truck lot and car lot divide as possible and now had its brights aimed directly at me. Pissed off that someone was blinding me with their brights, I quickly tossed the poop bags away and started walking back to my car. As I'm walking away, the dude starts flashing his lights over and over again. I'm almost to my car, wondering if I'm missing something and becoming more and more irritated. He starts creeping his truck in my direction again while flashing his lights. My dogs sensed my irritation and immediately went on alert, staring in the trucker's direction. I finally made my way to my car, and the guy is still flashing his lights while stopping his truck in my direction again. I don't scare easily, so I decided to stand there and glare in his direction. Then he finally stopped flashing his lights. Good, I assumed he was done and started getting my keys out to unlock the car. Suddenly, my dogs stiffened beside me, their hackles raised, and they began to growl. I heard the sound of a door opening and turned back in the trucker's direction. I saw his door was now opened, and I saw a foot starting to exit the truck. I'm sitting there thinking this guy is a complete idiot when, at this point, my husband shows up and wraps his arm around me while flipping the trucker off. The trucker's foot disappears back into his truck. He shuts his door and leaves the rest stop pretty fast. I told my husband about him flashing his lights, and he explained that truckers use this method to flag women down at rest stops for sex. I was grossed out. I'm guessing he thought I was alone because of how the rest stop was set up. However, I was in no way dressed like someone interested in random sex at a rest stop. I was wearing layers because it was cold and driving a newer car. Plus, what idiot thinks it's a good idea to try to approach someone with two huge dogs? Although I was never scared during the whole thing, I do think the situation was creepy because the guy was obviously not quite there and was acting pretty abrasive. We were hitchhiking through Europe, my then boyfriend and I, and on our way back home, a truck driver picked us up. We had had a few weird encounters on our trip before, but we had been on the road for about a month, and nothing really scary happened until we met this guy. He was a young guy, about 25, quite regular, spoke English okay, and had been away from home for a long time. I was a bit younger, with my boyfriend being around his age. My boyfriend was tired, so he took a seat on the bed in the truck and wasn't really trying to hold a conversation. During our trip, we switched turns as I usually do when I hitchhike with someone. One person talks with the driver, and the other relaxes in the back, so I was in the passenger seat. I think my boyfriend was even dozing off a little bit when the driver started complimenting me and asking about my boyfriend. It was still fine, nothing too weird, and I was just trying to talk to be good company. As we moved on, I started to feel a bit uncomfortable, but I didn't let anything on and only told my boyfriend that we should find truck drivers from our country to make the last part of our trip in one go. I translated this to English immediately because the truck driver became agitated and suspicious of what I was saying. I explained that we were really tired and our plan was to find our truck drivers before he had to take a long break so that we could continue traveling without interruption. We stopped for a short break at a gas station, and my boyfriend decided he was going to look for another truck driver in the parking lot, leaving me with this guy alone. Damn, the truck driver came on to me real hard, and I was scared shitless and didn't fight back. I could feel how aroused he was, and there was no doubt about his intentions. Luckily, my boyfriend was away for just a minute. At that moment, I realized we needed to get out of this situation fast. I didn't want to say anything to my boyfriend because I was scared of how he would react, so I decided to pretend nothing had happened. I was determined to get out at the next stop. We reached a large gas station for truck drivers only and told our driver we were going to look for other drivers heading our way. During our trip to this station, this guy got in touch with another driver, saying he could also take us, maybe one at a time. Damn, I thought, now he's planning a threesome. When I was finally alone with my boyfriend, I remained calm, hinted at what had happened, and insisted that we not stay with this driver no matter what. It took us about 5 minutes to find a group of truck drivers from our country. They were having beers and cracking jokes, and 2 of them agreed to take us. I jumped with joy. We went back to the truck to get our things. The guy had already brought his friend along and was offering my boyfriend to take a shower at the gas station, saying he would pay for him for no obvious reason. He was quite persistent, and as I very well remember, he never offered it to me. Needless to say, these 2 guys were very disappointed to see us go. I still remember how they were looking at me when I was taking our backpacks from the truck. I have never told my ex-boyfriend the details. I was just lucky that we got away from that truck driver, and I think he has never realized how bad the situation was. At that time, I was playing it cool the whole time, but inside, I was shaking. I could see how desperate that truck driver was and how much he wanted to get rid of my boyfriend. I was so angry at myself for staying with him in the truck by myself, but then all of our things were there. I was also angry for not fighting him back, but it was so sudden, and I got really scared. I've been a trucker for close to 15 years now. This happened to me in 2017. I was driving an overnight haul through the Mojave Desert in California, headed for a destination in Arizona. I think I was delivering appliances, but I don't really remember. It was pitch black darkness in every direction. The headlights on my semi were really dim at the time, and I'd been putting off getting them fixed forever. Usually, I couldn't tell the difference, but since there were basically no other cars on the road, it was much more obvious. I remember having to strain my eyes every few minutes to make out the road in the distance. That could have been a horror story in and of itself. I was debating pulling over for a couple of hours and waiting for sunrise, but I didn't want to waste my time. I desperately needed the money at the time, so I kept driving even though it wasn't fully safe. I figured since it was basically a straight line, it would be okay. I think it was about an hour before sunrise when I saw something approaching fast in the distance. Worried about hitting an animal, I slammed on the brakes. As my truck screeched to a stop, I realized what was in front of me, a car with its hazards on. The weird thing was that it was in the exact middle of the road, literally on the double yellow. What was even weirder was that the passenger door was wide open. My truck stopped maybe a foot before hitting it. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm a pretty fearless guy, and I know my way around a bar fight. Because of this, I wasn't really scared when I saw the car. I was more curious than anything. I thought maybe someone needed a jump or something, so I reversed the semi and pulled over. I thought about throwing some flares down but decided against it since I hadn't seen a single other car on the road besides this one. I got out of my truck and made my way over to the car. It was a warm, still night. I remember thinking how strange it was that there was almost no wind. It was also really quiet that night. The faint click of the hazards was the only sound in what felt like the entire desert. I got a little closer to the car. I vividly remember that it was a new-looking red Ford Fusion. I approached the car a little cautiously. Like I said, the passenger door was wide open. I walked around the car and stopped in my tracks. It was completely empty. I made sure of it too, checking the back seat and anywhere someone might be lying down. There was literally no one inside. All of a sudden, I was much less sure about the situation. I was expecting someone to need help of some sort, maybe even someone who took a nap in a really dumb spot. I certainly wasn't expecting this, though. The car was literally empty. I cast a few glances over my shoulder, feeling a lot more uneasy now. I kept whipping my head around, looking in every direction. I felt like someone was going to charge me or something. The problem was it was so dark that I couldn't see that far in front of me except for what was lit up by my truck's headlights. It was eerie. I waited a while longer, thinking about getting back in my truck and forgetting about this whole thing. Someone was out there somewhere. Against my better judgment, I decided to keep investigating. I looked inside the car, but everything seemed completely normal. The key was even in the ignition, although the engine was turned off. I got back out of the car and made my way over to the trunk. Might as well have a look, I figured. I went to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. I grabbed the key out of the ignition and unlocked the trunk. Still, though, the thing wouldn't budge. It was jammed from the inside somehow. I opened the back door and tried getting at the trunk through the back seat. To my surprise, it actually opened. There were 3 squished garbage bags back there, along with a rope that was tying the trunk closed. I remember glancing one more time over my shoulder before reaching for them. The coast was clear. I must have been within 5 inches from one of the bags when the loudest gunshot I've ever heard rang out into the night. I slammed my head on the roof of the car in shock. I didn't even think. I threw the keys on the front seat and got out of the car as fast as I could. As I was climbing into my semi, I heard a grungy voice yelling in the distance. He yelled, "Hey," a bunch of times, and his voice seemed to be quickly approaching. I scrambled into the semi and turned it on. I threw it in gear as fast as I could. I remember cursing a bunch of times as the engine initially stalled. And that's when I saw it. As my truck began pulling out, I saw a person standing at the trunk of the car. It was a short, husky guy with red hair. He was wearing overalls and shin-high boots. In his left hand, he was holding a small shovel. In his right, though, was an old-looking hunting rifle. We locked eyes for a few seconds as my truck began to drive past him. He didn't move. I remember him not looking crazy or anything. He had this worried look on his face. As I passed him, he dropped his shovel and started waving his hands. He yelled, "Wait," a few times, but I wasn't staying there another second. As I drove away, I watched in the rearview mirror as he ran after my truck for a few seconds before sprinting back to his car. It was clear he wanted me to stop, but there was absolutely no way I was going to do that. I stepped on it, pushing the semi much faster than I should have. I drove for like 5 minutes and started to think I was in the clear, but then I saw headlights fast approaching behind me. I remember feeling more scared than I've ever felt in my entire life. I called the police and told them what happened to the best of my ability. That's when the car was basically right on my tail. It started honking like crazy at me. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I just kept driving, praying to God he wouldn't try and ram me. After like 15 minutes of this, he cut in front of me and hit his brakes, forcing me to slow down. I was just about to crash into him when finally some flashing police lights appeared ahead. The Ford veered off to the right and sped into the desert, disappearing from sight. I pulled over and waited for the officer to show up. I frantically told him what had happened, but the useless cop decided to get a report from me rather than chase the guy down. I was so pissed about that. I told the guy like twice that he could probably catch up to him if he left now. The cop told me not to worry and that they'd do a thorough search as soon as backup arrived. He sent me on my way and said they'd call me if they ever had an update for me. They never did. None of my buddies have a story this crazy, and I've told it more times than I can count. I know what you're probably thinking. That guy was definitely burying bodies. That doesn't really explain why he had such a small shovel or why he tried to follow me. The bags in his trunk were also too small for that, although some of my buddies think he might have done some dismembering. For my own sanity, I like to think that he was burying some other kind of animal, maybe putting a diseased dog out of its misery or some dangerous snakes. I really have no idea. Either way, I've never been totally comfortable driving through deserts late at night after this experience. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.